Welcome back to Bonanza Disc Golf. It's a little bit of a rainy day, which might be appropriate for some people because today we got to talk about the Jomez DGPT merger. I don't know why, but I kind of love playing in the rain. Like mist. It's not like super rainy. The only thing I'm worried about is my camera, but otherwise we should be good. You know, I just kind of realized that I called it a merger, but I don't even know if it's technically a merger. It's definitely in the realm of mergers and acquisitions, which could be a merger, but it seems more like the Pro Tour. Ooh, that's a little high. And Disc Golf Network just acquired Jomez instead of like merged with Jomez. We're at Bird's Nest Disc Golf Course today. I kind of like this one because it's got some elevation change. None of the holes are wild. There's always a little bit of wind. Not a lot of lines to practice in Denver, but tomorrow, I'm pretty sure there might be tornadoes and hailstorms, but otherwise I'm gonna head down to Pagosa Springs because that's where my next tournament is. Otherwise, I'm gonna wait until Friday, go in. But that's gonna be at some sick wooded courses that I cannot wait to play at. Slightly higher elevation. So we're just gonna continue dialing in the bag today while we talk about this because, I mean, my bag is dialed, but I only finalized it like a week ago, meaning I'm not super comfortable with all my molds yet. And that was definitely apparent last tournament. But this whole Jomez DGPT thing is kind of a little tiny bit, don't click off the video of an I told you so, like with a video from last month. Hole 1, 470 down there. Honestly, even though I kind of called something like this happening, a lot of you guys actually DM me, were like, hey, you called this when it happened. Because I thought that Jomez was gonna have to change just based on the trajectory of the Pro Tour. And I'm definitely not the only one, there were a bunch of other people saying this, but I didn't quite expect it to happen this soon, but there might have been some reasons for that. I think the big question that a lot of people have had, even me, even though I thought this was gonna come, why it happened so soon is like, why is this all happening? And the speculation from All Too World, and like, just before I preface this, I know this video is like a week late. I've been like reading and listening to like everything that I can about this just because I listen to like almost all Disc Golf Media. But I think the main consensus is that Jomez was initially planning on paying $250,000 a year for 2 years to get league car coverage, to buy the rights to that media. Now, this is something that is pretty speculative, I guess, but All Too World says it, and they're a pretty reputable source of disc golf media. And it's been alleged on so many different podcasts that they weren't able to make those payments. So the Disc Golf Pro Tour kind of came to Jomez a little earlier than probably they expected to as well, because I'm sure that this has been in the back of their mind. Jomez is like the brand of disc golf media right now. And I'm sure they came to Jomez and said, hey, you don't want to pay this? Let's just buy you. And so they gave Jonathan Gomez a nice cushy deal and just bought them out instead of making Jomez pay out their 2-year $500,000 requirement, because apparently Jomez was getting a little strapped for cash because of like the custom disc market, and like they bought a lot of merchandise. I'm guessing they just had a lot of money tied up in inventory that wasn't selling at the rate that they thought. They said that kind of their sales jumped off a cliff instead of stayed at a plateau. Oh God. Step. I think this does explain it. I think also, just as a business owner, Jonathan was doing so many things that he didn't want to do. So it probably was an attractive deal to him, but compounded by the fact that they probably were going to be a little bit financially underwater. Because if they were still financially super viable, I'm sure that it would be something that Jonathan would want to continue doing until he felt like he was at a valuation that was relatively significant for them to be bought out. Because I'm guessing that the Pro Tour got Jomez for what a lot of people are alleging is pennies on the dollar from what they could be worth. Oh God. Pants hang so low, I always like hit them on the way down. I gotta figure out a solution for that. Whether it's the money or not though, this has a lot of both good and bad ramifications for disc golf media over the next 5, 10, however long amount of years. I think we've already started to see kind of what this buyout is doing for the sport in Jomez picking up FPO coverage, which I was listening to Debate Night yesterday on the Foundation Network, and Brody was saying, how did we not pick up on the fact that Jomez just randomly picked up FPO? Because it probably wasn't the best business decision, but it was something that they were able to do to help out the Pro Tour as this deal was probably finalizing throughout the offseason. Perfect. And I don't think post-production is ever going to go away because of this. I think that post-production happens in every sport. A lot of it's just under a different name. Like for instance, I'm a big Premier League fan. I love playing soccer. I haven't in a while. I'd love to find a league here in Denver for while I'm in town, but I'm a big soccer player and a big soccer fan, so much so that I prefer to call it football. That's how pretentious I am. But I don't watch Premier League live at all, but I'll always pick up the extended highlights, which is like 15 to 20 minutes, which kind of can be seen like what post-produced is. That's kind of what I equate it to in other sports, because other sports you don't just like go on and watch the whole 90 minutes, because if I was to do that, I'd just go on and watch the whole 4-hour broadcast. It's kind of the same as what they chop up into highlights, but I think not only that, but the highlight package or post-produced can even get better through Jomez being acquired by the Pro Tour. Oh, that thing is not as stable as I want it to be. All right, you guys are gonna have to let me nerd out here for a second because I'm a big like business nerdy kind of guy. And Jonathan Jomez, who's the founder of Jomez, Jonathan Jomez, you could put two together. But he now has a stake in the Pro Tour, which to me makes me think, this is very much 100%, 1000% speculation, but it makes me think that the Disc Golf Pro Tour also is pretty illiquid. Like it doesn't have a lot of money because they probably didn't need to give Jomez a stake, especially if it was largely a buyout because they weren't able to pay their end of the deal, which they've said that they've upheld. So it might not be that, it might just be that they actually did have some leverage because they were able to uphold their end of the deal. That's where the speculation it's not really super useful. But he has a stake now, not in Jomez, which is staying its own company that is being owned by the Disc Golf Pro Tour, which apparently is a DBA of another company. So it's a little bit difficult of a system, which they were talking about when they went on tour life with Brody and Yuli. But Jonathan now apparently has stake in the Disc Golf Pro Tour, that parent company, which I think honestly can only do good for the future of live and post-produce, because Jonathan obviously is a big post-produce guy. He does like live. I know he's talked about that before, but I mean, he created Jomez and has been the visionary there. So him having stake in both those companies, it could be a stake that does not mean anything in terms of decision making. I don't necessarily think that that's the case because there's not really a board there yet, but it definitely invests him in both live and post-produce to make both of them as good as they can be. So Jonathan Jomez is still the president of Jomez, which is a subsidiary company of either the DGPT or the parent company. I think it probably has to be the parent company because the DGPT is just a DBA, as they were saying. But I just think that this should make coverage for now slightly better as it kind of stays at its status quo. So we'll talk about the positives first and then get into a little bit of what the negatives are. But this is like a 350-foot uphill shot. I'm probably gonna go strike at it. Still trying to learn these guys at this elevation because I really like them for the hyzer flip ups. Nothing really flips easily up here. I cannot wait to get back to sea level in like 3 weeks because I feel like discs fly so much prettier at sea level. That's so low. It's gonna be fine, but sheesh. I think one of the first major benefits that this gives to the Disc Golf Network, especially live coverage, because I think that's still where the Disc Golf Pro Tour and the Disc Golf Network wants the majority of the viewership to be soon. But Jomez graphics have always been trend-setting in disc golf. And I say trend-setting even though a lot of people haven't like caught up to the trends. So they've just been head and shoulders above everybody. Now, with them integrating more seamlessly with the Disc Golf Pro Tour, they should be able to create much better graphics packages for the Disc Golf Network's live coverage, mostly because of asset sharing and the IP that Jomez has, as you guys see, like with their drone flyovers, which honestly are just better drone flyovers than what the Disc Golf Pro Tour has been having. So I don't see why they don't just take the Jomez flyovers, even this weekend at OTB starting in a couple days, and integrate that into their own live coverage, because theirs honestly just end up looking pretty shaky and not nearly as good as the Jomez flyovers do. But also the graphics that Jomez is able to put together for like whole flyovers showing where the disc needs to land to be in the quote unquote birdie zone, so that it's not like literally just a Google Earth thing, which I think is better than nothing by far. But it will look much cleaner to have the Jomez flyover get integrated into the DGM broadcast. So I'm hoping we start to see that this weekend even, because it's all now under the same roof. It's all the same company essentially. Oh God. Gotta work on these circle twos for the tournament. There we go. On top of that, I think post-produce should get better as well. I don't think for now we're gonna see more cameras being added, because Jomez cameras were already sharing with DGPT just because of the licensing structure, and I talked about that a little bit in my first video. But I think on top of that, Jomez will be able to get better in that Jonathan, who runs Jomez, he was even saying he was like juggling 10 jobs. As someone who runs my own YouTube channel, just by myself, I don't like have to do any of the HR, I don't have to do any of that extra stuff. But I know there are some things that like I just don't wanna do that I still have to do in order to keep this afloat. And now that he has a massive company behind him, or at least massive for disc golf perspective, he'll be able to offload the things that he doesn't want to do to that company while maintaining the creative vision and presidency of Jomez, which is exactly what he wants to do. And that seems to be exactly what the Disc Golf Pro Tour and Disc Golf Network are hiring him to do. So that should just make coverage on Jomez, as well as live coverage, slightly better, because he'll be in his creative purview, which is one of the things that really created him as the brand and Jomez as the brand that it is today. And I think because of that, we should see like more putting games and things like that, because now they'll have extra funding where it's not split between the Disc Golf Pro Tour and Jomez. They don't have to pay them the $20,000 a month. It'll be better and more games, which should be a little bit more exciting. All right, this one's 480 down there. I, for one, am excited for what this is gonna do. I like change in general, so if you don't like change, then this might not be as exciting, but I think it should do well. I know personally from talking to some pros that the putting games had to get cut short last year because there was not as much funding for them, as I'm sure they had to worry about their $20,000 a month obligation to the Pro Tour to cover live coverage, because that's what their main thing was that they knew would do well, whereas the putting games were a little more speculative. They can now have the opportunity to be a little more speculative and a little more creative with some of their non-coverage media, which is what Jomez might ultimately end up turning into. Can you skip? Oh, too much grass. I think one way that this could also really help coverage is that Jonathan is a big storytelling guy. He understands the importance of that because all media is storytelling inherently. And that's something that I really think the Disc Golf Network, especially commentating, is not really good at. Oh no, it flipped. I find myself getting really frustrated a lot of times listening to commentary because they tend to just focus on anecdotes about themselves in the booth, especially when it's 3 or more people. I feel like 3 becomes a crowd and then they can just like riff off of one another and you end up missing like 2 or 3 really important or really good shots that they don't commentate anything over. And it's like, there's been a bunch of random anecdotes that I don't feel like add a lot to the commentary that take away from the storytelling that can be happening. And I think that Jonathan coming over with a storytelling attitude, because even if you watch Jomez, and I'm not sure if this is like something that is in the like media plan, but German, Yuli, and Sexton, they all do this as well. But when a shot happens, they stop talking about whatever random anecdote that they're talking about, which is fun, and like that's an exciting part of listening to commentary is that personality, but they stop talking about that, focus on the shot. After the shot concludes, they go back to talking about it, and they don't even have as much time in between because they're doing 45 minutes for a whole entire card instead of 4 hours. I'm hoping that that is something in company policy at Jomez that they can bring over to the Disc Golf Network so that they stop talking in the middle of throws about random things and start talking about the throws themselves and then get back to talking about the random things, because that'll make me much more interested in listening to what they have to say about like random stuff in their past. But I also want to hear about the shots and the stories that are developing, and it seems like sometimes that gets taken away from just because of how much they end up talking about themselves instead of the shots during the coverage, missing the shots. I don't care if they talk about themselves, but you can't miss the shots in order to do that. I think too, one main thing is that, as I talked about, they have second card obligations that they have to worry about. But for instance, something like James Conrad's round, which was recorded, can get integrated into a Jomez coverage now because they're not just covering first card, or they don't have to be just covering first card since they've been absorbed by the Disc Golf Network. So James Conrad 17 down in Jonesboro, parts of that can get integrated into that as kind of like a highlights package, which I think will be able to tell even more storylines in post-produced, which is one of the things that was lacking in post that live really had, was all those storylines. I think that this can be really good, but it's definitely not all positives. There are definitely some negatives that can come. We'll talk about that here over the last couple holes. Sounds like 330 up there. Kind of interesting lines. I'm going to try to get there with the honor, but I'm really not throwing far today. I think my first big question though is, what does this mean for other big production companies, the GK Pros, Gatekeeper Media, Central Coast? Oh God. Is that, no, it's not going to get there, is it? Okay, no, that was short. That felt short. That was, whew. I think my first thought on what this means for other companies is that I really stand by what I said about GK Pro in my last video. If you guys noticed, last year they had FPO coverage and we're doing a lot more coverage-based things. This year, they branched off into some kind of weird stuff with pros, but it's much more developed into a brand about developing pros characters, or pros as characters, not like some self-help thing. But they've really leaned into the games, added a lot more skins, and I think it seems like they're even developing a bigger relationship with the Disc Golf Pro Tour based around these games. So maybe the Pro Tour wants to pick them up eventually, but it seems right now that without really needing to focus too much on things that are at Disc Golf Pro Tour events, there's not nearly as big of a need for them to necessarily be acquired by the Disc Golf Network. And I think that they're moving in a smart way to make sure that they don't go out of business just in case the Disc Golf Network just up and says, hey, we have Jomez now. We basically don't need any of you guys, so you can't record at any of our events. But there is a positive that can happen in that scenario for these companies, or at least the people who work for those companies. I'm just throwing really poorly so I can practice my circle twos. See, practice. I think one problem that disc golf companies have right now is the lack of specialized labor in disc golf. Meaning that if the Disc Golf Network wanted to start absorbing coverage for second card FPO, second card MPO, and just put it all under either the Jomez umbrella or housing post-production on their own either YouTube channel or their own subscription-based service. But if that happens, they're gonna need the knowledge that these camera people have. And yes, Jonathan Gomez did create a massive system so that they can produce the content as efficiently as they do, but it's really helpful to have expert labor. So I don't think that if the Disc Golf Network is just like, okay, we don't need you anymore, they don't actually need those people, because they still need the people who are running the cameras and are running those systems, but they just need to retrain them under the Jomez system, I would say. Maybe they'll even call it the Jomez system. And in that scenario, it's probably even better because now those cameras are all DGN cameras, meaning that they can run a little bit more live to them. Hopefully with more acquisitions, they'll also be able to build up their base for advertisers so that they can pitch them a better deck. I think they were already doing that with Jomez numbers now based on some things that I heard, but that could also lead them to further grow the sport in another beneficial way. There's a lot of scenarios, guys. Slightly short. I think the win for the sport that would happen in all of this is that it could incentivize Gatekeeper Media, Ace Run Pro to cover even more of the bigger A tiers that are off of the Pro Tour. But I think that'd be beneficial for everybody because places like the Disc Golf Guy and Gatekeeper and Central Coast Disc Golf, who also right now does a lot of like the Silver Series stuff that Jomez doesn't even do. Jomez might start to do that and really take Central Coast out of a job, because I don't know why they would need to acquire Central Coast to do something that Jomez arguably does better and has done the best out of everybody, which is the post-produced for silvers. They could start to cover a lot more events and build up the prestige of even more events that are not on the tour, which could help the tour have a more robust network of tournaments to choose from for the tour, as well as giving a lot more light to more people. These major companies, these production networks who have tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of subscribers, will be able to share new tournaments with the new audience. My big thoughts on these other companies is I don't feel like the Disc Golf Pro Tour needs them really at all anymore since they have Jomez and the system that Jonathan created, but it could be the cheapest way to get all of that labor under one roof is just to buy the companies and to keep disc golf happy, because disc golf is still kind of a really buddy sport. Doing things that are more like traditional business minded is not something that I don't think disc golf accepts very well, and is one of the reasons why I think the Disc Golf Pro Tour is going to roll out things relatively slowly for Jomez, because Jomez will not stay the same. Two nose up. So I think they're being very calculated with what they say media-wise throughout this whole transition. And they've continuously said, hey, like nothing is changing right now, like things will be the same, but things are gonna definitely be changing. Now, it's definitely not gonna happen overnight, and I don't think anything that they're saying is a lie. I just think they're being very calculated with the words that they use, because just like I'd said in my initial video, I was asking, could this be the end of Jomez as we know it? I never thought it'd be the end of Jomez actually, but Jomez as we know it, I thought had to change. But I don't think that it makes a lot of sense for the Pro Tour to be housing all of their post-produced media on a YouTube channel that is not the Disc Golf Network's YouTube channel, because even for the sport, it creates like kind of a dual power structure, which I'm sure that they don't want. I don't think that post-produced is going to ever fully go away. Like I was saying earlier, it's kind of akin to highlights. I think it's always going to be there, but I don't think that we're always going to have it as next day coverage, at least not for non-paying Disc Golf Network subscribers. This one's a rip, hole 7, 425 down there. It doesn't seem to make sense for the Disc Golf Network to buy Jomez just to have them run as they've always run, because there's a lot of value in post-produced, and they want to increase the value in live media, meaning just one of my speculations from the last video that they might move post-produced to say a week later could be coming sooner than we think. Probably not this year, maybe not next year, but I think if we are in the 2025 season and we still have next day post-produced, either something in the Disc Golf Pro Tour's plans changed and they realized it was probably a bad idea to move it, or maybe they're just not as smart as I think. I don't know. I don't think in 2025 we're going to be having the same post-produced kind of coverage that we do now. My guess is they'll probably move post-produced to the day after, and that's when the first round will come out. It'll be the day after the tournament ends. So Sunday, tournament's over, Monday, first round comes out, then second round Tuesday, third round Wednesday, fourth round if there is one on Thursday. But you can probably still get next day on the Disc Golf Network to catch up on before the first round of coverage. And I do think that post-produced media is going to change in the way that it is produced, especially if they're able to add second and third card. Maybe if someone on league card isn't really doing too much in the tournament, maybe they can add in someone from second card and show those shots as well, because they'll have an access to a much bigger library. But that might force them to move it even further from next day. So it might just, you might not even get next day if you do subscribe to Disc Golf Network. I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing, and I think it's probably best case scenario is the day after the tournament ends, because I don't think that that would honestly anger too many people, but I think it would increase the value of live, and maybe not everybody, definitely not everybody who watches Jomez and likes the post-produced coverage is going to subscribe to live, because most people it's just not a feasible thing. But I just can't see Jomez housing post-produced media in 3 to 5 years the same way that it does now. I think a lot of that will move to the Disc Golf Network. I don't think they'll take off the post-produced that's already been on there, because that's still accruing so much ad revenue for Jomez, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Into the tailwind, stable out. Heck yeah. Skip on there. I think it skipped over that last berm. Pretty solid shot. I can definitely see a world in which Jomez turns into another kind of GK Pro, where they're focusing a lot more on games and player profiles and things like that to build up the base of disc golf interest. And the Disc Golf Pro Tour's YouTube channel is where they might house a lot more of the coverage, which they have in conjunction with Jomez. And maybe they do something to add the Jomez branding to that. But I think Jomez is such a powerful brand in disc golf now that it wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to dismantle that brand. I think it's something that they might do over the next 5 to 10 years and just have everything be consolidated and Jomez be like a relic of the old times. Like I think of Spin TV. I don't really know what that is. I just got into disc golf last January, but I've heard that name thrown around. Doesn't really have a lot of weight to me, but to some people who were playing a long time ago, maybe it does have a lot of weight. That might be the reality that we see with Jomez here relatively soon, but I think that's probably 5-10 years potentially down the line. All right, this is definitely my best drive on this hole yet. I think it probably would have parked it if there wasn't a little stacky of things there. Stacky. Let's go, good bird. Don't look at the second one. So I think Jomez and the Disc Golf Network are gonna continue operating the way that they have been operating for this year. Maybe not even fully for this year. I think that if we take a good look at it, by the end of this year, there will be significant differences on both Jomez and the Disc Golf Network that happen because of this merger 5-6 months down the line. And I think next year, they're gonna start to roll out things over the off season that are because of Jomez and the Disc Golf Network. That just seems to be like exciting, new, good things for live coverage as well as post-produced. Some of it being that post-produced might start to get moved in some capacity, or all cards get absorbed by Jomez. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens. I personally think that it's probably a net positive for the sport, but it's all gonna depend on how they end up acting upon it. And I think the Disc Golf Network and the Disc Golf Pro Tour have been one of the best entities in disc golf. I've been in this for obviously a short amount of time, so I don't have the full background, but what they do seems to be mostly for the good of disc golf. So I'm really excited to see kind of what happens throughout the year and what happens with this merger. Hopefully Jonathan got the bag. Hopefully he's pretty happy with his stake with the company, as well as maybe a little bit of a cash payout. Not exactly sure, they're not giving those details out, but if you wanna check out my first video and get my initial thoughts, because there are some different things that I have thoughts about the state of live and post, check that out right down there. I feel like my bag is getting dialed. I don't like throwing super far, but I'm not like throwing super short, especially being slightly injured. Definitely gonna take some Tylenol for the tournament, don't tell anybody. And subscribe if you wanna check out the tournament coverage. I'll be leaving tomorrow playing some nice wooded courses, which should be so much fun and a big, different, nice change of pace on the channel. Probably uploading those videos in a week or two, but tournament coverage coming at you in like 3 days. Things are moving fast. That sounds like a thunderstorm is rolling in. That's not good. Okay, love you guys, bye.